Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, let's talk about all of my Q1 reading. So I wanted to do a quarterly review video where I talk about my favorite books of the quarter, my stats of that quarter, and then also let's do a goals check-in. So I did make a beginning of the year goals video for 2022, and I want to check in to make sure I am keeping on track with those goals. So let's start with the stats for this last quarter for all of my reading. Starting with these genre breakdowns, I read a total of 19 fantasy books. So many. 6 thriller books, 3 historical fiction, 3 romance, 1 contemporary, 1 memoir, 2 mysteries, 1 horror, 3 sci-fi, and 3 classics. For the age breakdown, I read a total of 37 adult books and 5 YA or children's books. Star rating breakdowns, I read 1 2.5-star book, 7 3-star books, 4 3.5-star books, 14 4-star books, 7 4.5-star books, and 9 5-star books. So that's huge because like the majority of my reading was 3.5 and above. And I think that has a lot to do with how easily I have been DNFing books this year. I think that if I had pushed through a lot of those DNFs, I probably would have a lot more lower ratings in this breakdown. So I'm very, very pleased with like the quality of my reading. So checking in on some of my goals from the beginning of the year, the first big goal I had was, of course, the Goodreads reading challenge where you select how many books you want to read that year. And for this year, I selected 75 books, and I'm actually at 42 books. So I'll probably pass the 75 book mark, which is great, but I also figured I'm probably going to be a lot busier later this year. I have a move coming up, some personal life stuff, so I just think that by front-loading my year with a lot of reading, I will hopefully stay ahead and not end up falling behind when I do get a lot busier with my personal life later this year. I also wanted to read more genres and kind of stretch myself out of my comfort zone. And so how I did this was I said I wanted to read 5 classics and 5 middle grade books. The classics number, I've read 3. So I've read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, I've read Anne of Green Gables, and I've read Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a modern classic. So 3 classics towards that 5 classic goal, which is great, and we're not even halfway through the year yet, so I feel confident that I will hit that. But I haven't read any middle grade yet. Now I do plan on fixing this. I have quite a few middle grade books on my TBR that I've bought recently and acquired recently, and I actually have a whole video coming out this month to talk about all the middle grade books that are kind of highest priority on my TBR. So I'm definitely planning on focusing on middle grade later this year. I figure that it's good to keep those middle grades maybe towards busier times in my personal life where I just don't have as much like focus and attention on like big epic fantasy books and want something a little bit easier, a little bit smaller scope to read and enjoy. And I feel like middle grades are good for when I'm in those moods, but I have been in a very like epic fantasy mood. So that's why I feel like I haven't read any yet. But I do plan on fixing this, and I still plan on hitting that goal by the end of the year. Now, I did have a video that went up at the beginning of the year, or the end of last year, with 10 of my most anticipated books of this year that were coming out. And I wanted to actually read all 10 of those. So I do have an update on those. I have managed to read 3 of those anticipated releases, and I actually do have 2 on my TBR for this month in April, so that will be 5 completed by the end of this month, which is great, so I'm definitely on track. However, I know that there have been some changes to some of the release schedules for a couple of these books that were on this list originally. So I might do an updated anticipated releases video, but I do still plan on hopefully getting to as many as I can from that initial video. So if you don't know which video I'm talking about, I'll link it down below if you want to check out what 10 books were on that list. So far, I am on track with my new releases. I'm very happy with that. All right, and then series. Series was a huge focus for me this year because I had a lot of ongoing series that I have needed to catch up on at the beginning of the year. And I have found that if I do not read series, books in series really close together, I have a really hard time fully enjoying that series because I will lose a lot of details from previous books going into the next books. So I figured if I was going to finish out series this year, I was going to read them close together, and I'm very happy to report that I am only currently in the middle of 6 ongoing series. I wanted to get that number down to 5, and so far, so good. I completely caught up on 3 series so far this year that I needed to catch up on, and I have actually ended up DNFing 3 series that were on my list at the beginning of the year. I found that when I was reading the sequels, I just wasn't as interested anymore. Those 3 series that I did DNF were the Expanse series, the King Raven trilogy by Stephen R. Lawhead, and then the what's it called? Sword and Fire trilogy by Melissa Caruso, I think. Those were the 3 that I DNF'd. The 3 that I caught up on were the Under the Northern Sky trilogy. I only have that last book now to read, which is coming out this summer. I also caught up on the Burning Empire saga, which has the 3rd book coming out actually next month. So hopefully I will get to that 3rd book very shortly after its release. And then finally, the last series that I caught up on was the Drowning Empire trilogy, with that 3rd book not due until at least late this year, with the possibility of it being pushed to next year. So those were the 3 that I caught up on. And then the ongoing series that I have right now include Legends of the First Empire, which I have 3 more books to read in that series. I also have the Ryrie of Revelations, which I'm not going to complete until I finish Legends of the First Empire. So that's kind of on track so far. I also have the Discworld Death Collection, which I have 2 more books to read in that series, as well as the Binti trilogy, which I only have 1 book left to read, and I plan on finishing that this month, as well as the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, so I should be caught up on it after this month. The last ongoing series, the 6th one, is the Crescent City series with House of Sky and Breath, just coming out last month, so I haven't gotten to it yet, but I do plan on getting to it soon, so I will hopefully be caught up on that series as well. Doing really well with my series. I'm very, very happy with that. I definitely want to keep that number low and continue to try to prioritize reading sequels very shortly after reading the prior book. Now, another goal I had was to get my physical TBR number down to 50 books, which means I wanted to only own 50 books that I have not read. This number was around 140 at the beginning of the year, and it did go up to 172 unread books. I can't explain myself there. I've just been very excited about buying books this year. So yeah, that is the only goal that I am not on track with, but maybe I can fix that later this year. We'll see. Now that we've talked stats, we've talked goals, let's chat about the best books that I have read this year. So I'm going to talk about all of my 5-star books. Let's talk about fantasy first, because I read the most fantasy books. So the best of those that I've read so far are The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart, which I read for my BookTuber Friend Challenge, which I will link down below if you haven't seen that video. And I loved this. I loved the animal companion. I loved the characters. I loved the mysteries. I loved the magic and the world and how cool and unique it was. There was so much that I loved about this fantasy book, and it just had everything I love about fantasy in it. So that definitely deserves to be on the best of the best list, as well as Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I also read for the BookTuber Friend Challenge. Loved this book. This is a standalone fantasy book, which is fantastic, and it actually works as a standalone. It's not like a standalone with this cliffhanger ending where you're like, no, I wanted more. No, it like gives you a very satisfying conclusion. It is this military fantasy following this girl named Emily who feels like she is straight out of a Jane Austen novel. She has this very like Pride and Prejudice romance in this book, and she goes off to war and is fighting in this war, and it's just so good. It's so good. I loved Emily so much. And then my final two fantasy books that I have on this list are from the same series, and that is Age of Swords and Age of War by Michael J. Sullivan, the second and third books in the Legends of the First Empire series. And I read the first book also as part of that BookTuber Friend Challenge, which that challenge ended up being very good for me. I love this series. This is going to be an all-time favorite fantasy series, and I like feel confident in saying that without even having finished the series because of how much I love these characters. I love our crew. I love how Michael J. Sullivan writes female characters. They are so strong in completely different ways. Each of them are needed in such different ways. They all work together so well. It's this beautiful cast of amazing female characters. There's some great male characters as well. Like, he definitely writes great male characters as well. It's not just the females, but the emotions this series can pull out of me. It made me cry. It has such sad moments, but it has such epic moments of triumph. It's just beautiful. I love this series. All right, and then just everything that's not fantasy. Let's talk about those best books. The first being Runaway by Harlan Coben, which this was my first Harlan Coben book. I know he is a very prolific thriller writer, and he just has so many books and is so popular. And so I started with Runaway, and I'm so glad I did because it is fantastic. It was 5 stars easily. I was hooked from page 1 and could not stop reading it. It was one of those books where the minute I started reading it, I couldn't fall asleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't do anything until I finished the book. You're following a father who is looking for his one runaway daughter who ends up getting into like drugs and gets into this like really messed up plot, and it's just like you have to know how it's going to turn out. And I think Harlan Coben does such a good job of writing like those family dynamics and like something you can really relate to, and you just understand like the family and what they're going through, and you're just like, oh, you're just like in it with them. It was so good. It was so good. We also have The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, which I know that this is incredibly popular. I think that this one deserves every little bit of hype it gets. It was a Grump Sunshine trope. It was fake dating. I didn't know I loved fake dating until now. I think I love that trope, and I think I love the Grump Sunshine trope. Like, I think that both of those tropes are something that I haven't really read before in romance, and I've just figured out, like, I think I love them. So I'm definitely gonna look for more romance books with those two tropes because they really work for me. And this book, just the writing, the chemistry, the slow burn, the adorable moments between these two characters. I love both of these characters apart from each other, and I love them together. Like, it just had everything that works for me in romance. Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. This is a gorgeous memoir of Ashley C. Ford's life growing up with an incarcerated father. She grows up without him there, but he's always kind of looming above them and is kind of this looming absence in their life. And she doesn't know why he's there as she's growing up, but she slowly figures it out, and you kind of have to deal with like the repercussions of her figuring that out. And it was just this beautiful coming of age story that was really, really well written. And even like the quieter moments where you're just sitting there like in her day-to-day were so wonderfully told that you were just so engaged every moment. Like, I loved this, and I highly recommend the audiobook if you have access to it because the author narrates it herself, and I think she adds a lot of that emotion behind the words that adds even more to the experience. So highly recommend this memoir. We also have The Maid by Nita Prose, which I was not expecting to love this as much as I did, and it's sold as a like cozy mystery novel that's in the vein of like Agatha Christie, but I actually think that's a little bit to its disservice to market it like that, because this book very much is surrounding a murder investigation in this very prestigious hotel, but what it's much more about than like the murder mystery is actually concentrating on Molly, the maid, who is our main character, and she is neurodivergent. She doesn't pick up on social cues and doesn't see the world in the same way that a lot of other people do. So she is very much the main focus of the story. It's much more of like a character study for her and her background and her growing up and her experiences and how that's led her to where she is now, and then kind of her getting wrapped up in this murder investigation and how she has to make connections to get herself unraveled from it. And it's just beautiful. I loved it because I loved Molly. I loved Molly as a character so much. She's one of my favorite characters, definitely, that I've read from. I loved her from the first page. Like the first page of this book, I knew it was going to be a favorite. I just knew. And the ending of the book was just so heartwarming and sweet, and it made me cry. And it was just, oh, it was a beautiful story. The last book I have is The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, which was a historical fiction book I knew I was gonna like because I always enjoy Kristen Hanna. Every time I read her books, she makes me cry. She just takes me through it. And this book did the same exact thing. She always does this to me, where she writes these amazingly strong female characters that are so different from one another. Like, all of her main female characters are very different, but they're all so strong and resilient in totally different ways, and they're just so inspiring every time. And so this book in particular follows a girl named Elsa who is growing up kind of in the midst of the 20s, and she's in the heart of Texas. She goes to live with this family of farmers in the heart of Texas, and you have a time jump where it jumps to 1932, where you are in the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl era, and you're in Texas with these farmers, and just following what they had to go through. You follow their journey across the country to hopefully find relief and happiness, and it's just the most beautiful story. It very much concentrates on Elsa and her strength and what she has to do to survive, what she has to do for her children, for them to survive. It's beautiful. Beautiful, it's hopeful, it's inspiring, and it made me very thankful for my life and what I very much take for granted nowadays, because reading about these struggles that these characters had to go through, which mirrored, I'm sure, a lot of other families' very real struggles during this time, was just, it was very eye-opening. So this is fantastic. I loved this book. It was so good. So those were my best books so far of the year. Did you see any that you've also read, and what did you think of them? And then how is your reading year going? Are you staying on track with your goals? Are you happy with the books you've been reading? Let me know in the comments down below. Let's chat. I love to chat with you guys. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.